I don't remember much about my real dad. He passed away when I was just 4. My mom remarried a year later, and that's when things started to change. His name was Rick. To everyone else, he was a good man, a hard-working contractor, respected in our small town in Missouri. But to me, he was never Dad. Not because I didn't want him to be, but because he never tried to be. Rick had 2 kids from a previous marriage, Lena and Josh. They were a year or 2 older than me and made it clear from the start that I didn't belong. When we moved into Rick's house, I got the smallest bedroom. It didn't have a closet and the window was jammed shut. Meanwhile, Lena had a pink canopy bed and a room with a view of the backyard. Josh had posters on his wall, a game console, and new furniture. I asked once why I couldn't decorate my room like them. Rick just said, "Don't waste money on things that don't last." At first, I thought it was just tough love. I tried harder. Good grades, doing chores without being asked, trying to be invisible when tensions ran high. But nothing ever seemed good enough. My name was never on the family Christmas card. My school pictures never made it to the fridge. On family trips, I was told to pack last and sit in the middle seat. I still remember one summer day when I was around 11. We were at a barbecue in the backyard, and one of Rick's friends asked, "And who's this little one?" Rick didn't hesitate. He chuckled and said, "Oh, that's my stepdaughter, from my wife's first marriage." That moment burned, not because he called me his stepdaughter, but because of how quickly he distanced himself, like I was a footnote in his life story. When my mom passed away from breast cancer 2 years later, everything got worse. Rick stopped pretending to care. He said I could stay until I was old enough to manage on my own. I was 12. From that point on, I knew this house was never home. I was living under their roof, eating their food, but I was always walking on eggshells. Lena and Josh called me charity case behind my back. I heard them. I just stopped reacting. People say blood makes a family. I learned early that sometimes family is just a word, and sometimes the people who share your roof can still make you feel like you don't belong. I tried to stay in touch after I left for college. I really did. At first, I'd call Rick on the holidays, even send Christmas cards from my dorm. I never got one back, not once. Lena and Josh never responded to my messages either. Still, a small part of me hoped. Maybe time would soften things. Maybe after I graduated, things would change. They didn't. The first time I went back for Thanksgiving break, I was excited. Nervous, too. I brought a pie I'd baked myself, even picked out a sweater I thought Rick might like. But when I got there, it was like walking into someone else's family gathering. The living room was decorated, the table was set, but there wasn't a seat for me. Lena looked me up and down like I was a stranger. Josh barely nodded. Rick said, "Oh, you're here. You can eat later. We don't have enough chairs." No one asked how college was going. No one offered me a plate. I stood there holding that pie, my arms shaking, wondering why I even bothered. Later, I overheard Lena in the kitchen whispering to Josh, "Why does she keep coming back? She's not even family." That night, I left early and cried the whole drive back to campus. It got worse the next summer when I asked if I could store some of my boxes at the house while I interned in Chicago. Rick didn't even let me finish. He said, "That's not your house anymore, Avery. Find your own space." He didn't even ask what the internship was for. I had just landed a position at a top design firm, something I'd worked toward for years. But it didn't matter to him. Every time I tried to step closer, they pushed me farther away. Eventually, I stopped calling, stopped writing, stopped hoping. I got a job, rented my own apartment, and learned how to spend holidays alone. I created my own little rituals. Chinese takeout on Christmas Eve, movies on Thanksgiving, candles on my birthday, just for me. I told myself I was fine, that I didn't need them, but deep down, there was always a part of me that wondered what I'd done wrong. I wasn't perfect. I didn't always say the right thing, but I tried. I tried so hard. And they still made it painfully clear I wasn't one of them. I was a reminder of someone Rick lost, an inconvenience, a shadow from the past that didn't fit into their perfect little family photo. So I stopped trying to fit in, and I started building a life where I didn't have to beg for space at the table. After that final Thanksgiving, I stopped looking back. I focused on school and worked every part-time job I could get, waitressing, tutoring, even cleaning offices at night. I didn't have a safety net. No one to call if rent was late or if I got sick. It was just me. And honestly, that was freeing in its own way. I moved to Austin after graduation with nothing but a suitcase, a secondhand laptop, and a head full of ideas. I had no connections, no family, no guarantees, just determination. And maybe a little spite. I took a job at a small interior design firm during the day, and at night I worked on building my own brand. I'd post design sketches on Instagram, offer free consultations to friends, and slowly word started to spread. I wasn't flashy. I didn't take on big clients right away. I just kept showing up, every single day. There were nights I cried on the kitchen floor, wondering if it was worth it. Times I skipped meals to cover software subscriptions or fabric samples. But little by little, I started getting real clients, people who believed in me, who saw my work, not my last name. By my late 20s, I had saved enough to rent a studio and hire my first assistant. Then a second. My little one-woman brand turned into a boutique agency. We helped homeowners, small cafes, even boutique hotels design warm, thoughtful spaces that felt like home. And still, not once did Rick or his kids reach out. I saw on Facebook that Lena had gotten married. Josh started working in his dad's construction company. They posed for photos in front of that same house I once lived in, smiling like life had always been that perfect. It hurt, more than I liked to admit, but I kept my head down. I wasn't doing this for them. I was building something I could call mine. There's a quiet kind of power in building a life without applause. No one clapped when I signed my first lease. No one sent flowers when I hit my first 6 figures. But I knew I had come this far without handouts or shortcuts. Sometimes I'd pass by homes I helped design and just smile, thinking, they'll never know what it took for me to get here. And honestly, that was enough. I didn't need validation from people who once treated me like a guest in my own home. But fate had something unexpected in store. Because one morning, sitting at a cafe reviewing floor plans, I got an email from a real estate agent. Subject line: home available, great potential. It was their house, the house I grew up in, the one where I was never invited to the table. I stared at the email for a long time. There it was, the house, the address. The same one I'd written 1,000 times on school forms and doctor paperwork. The house I never truly belonged in, but somehow still haunted my dreams. At first I thought it had to be a mistake, but when I clicked the link, the photos confirmed it. The faded red shutters, the crooked mailbox, the oak tree still standing tall in the front yard. It was theirs. It was mine. Sort of. I called the realtor, pretending to be just another investor. She told me Rick had fallen into financial trouble. He'd retired early due to health issues, and the house was too much for him to keep up with. Neither Lena nor Josh wanted to take responsibility, so they decided to sell. For a moment, I just sat there in silence. All these years I had dreamed about moving forward, never looking back. But suddenly, there was a door open. A chance to take back the one place where I'd once been made to feel invisible. It didn't take me long to make a decision. I contacted my attorney and arranged to purchase the house through my company. I didn't want them to know it was me. At least not yet. The offer went through quickly. I paid in cash. When the papers were finalized, I drove out there. Pulling into the driveway felt surreal. It looked smaller than I remembered, but the air still smelled like pine and summer and something bittersweet. Rick was there, standing by the porch with a clipboard. He looked older, thinner. He didn't recognize me at first. Until I stepped out of the car. He blinked twice. Avery? I smiled. Hi, Rick. Looks like I'm the new owner. His face fell. You bought the house? I did. He looked like he wanted to say something, but no words came. Behind him, Lena stepped out with a confused look. Wait, she bought it? I kept my voice steady. I did it through my company. You didn't recognize the name, did you? Rick's mouth opened, then closed again. The silence between us stretched. I remember when you told me I wasn't family, I said, keeping my tone even. But I guess now, this house belongs to me. No one said a word. For the first time in years, I felt taller. Not because I'd won, but because I'd come back not with anger but with power. Quiet, controlled, and earned. I didn't slam the door shut on them, not yet. I had other plans. The days after the closing were quiet. Almost too quiet. Rick didn't reach out. Neither did Lena or Josh. I think they were still trying to process it. How the girl they had dismissed all those years ago now held the deed to their home. I didn't gloat. I didn't post anything online. I didn't show up to rub it in. But I wasn't done. I had no intention of kicking them out immediately. I wanted them to sit with it. To understand what it felt like to live under someone else's roof, someone they once made feel like a burden. So I had my lawyer draft a formal lease. 3 months. Market rate. Utilities not included. I sent it through certified mail. Rick signed it and returned it the next day. No note, no apology, just a signature. A week later, I showed up to the house not as Avery, the forgotten stepdaughter, but as the owner. I rang the bell. Lena opened the door. Her eyes narrowed when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I own the house," I said, calmly. "I'm doing a walkthrough before renovation planning begins." "Renovation? You're changing things." "Yes," I said. "I haven't decided yet if I'll keep it as a rental or flip it. Either way, it'll be different." She scoffed. "Wow, you're really enjoying this, aren't you?" I looked her in the eyes. "No, Lena, this isn't about revenge. This is about closure. You all made it clear I wasn't welcome here. I just finally stopped waiting for a seat at the table and bought the whole damn table." Rick was sitting in the living room, silent. He didn't even look at me. "You could have just let it go," Lena muttered. I laughed, not cruelly, just tired. "I did let it go. I let go of needing your acceptance. I let go of waiting for Rick to say he was proud. I let go of hoping you'd ever treat me like a sister." She didn't respond. I walked the house slowly, room by room. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The hallway where I used to tiptoe at night, the back porch where I'd sit alone during family barbecues, the tiny bedroom that once held all my dreams. Now it was mine. Before I left, I turned back to Rick. 3 months, I reminded him, then we'll reevaluate. He nodded without meeting my gaze. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one trying to prove I belonged. I already did. On paper, in ink, and in full ownership. The first month passed with barely a word. Rick mailed the rent check on time. It cleared. I didn't hear from him, no calls, no emails, nothing, just silence. And that suited me just fine. Lena, on the other hand, wasn't so quiet. She emailed my assistant twice, once to ask about lowering the rent due to family circumstances, and once to complain about a leak under the kitchen sink. I responded formally, as the landlord. Per the lease agreement, tenants are responsible for minor maintenance. As for rent adjustments, our rates are aligned with the current market. And she didn't like that. The next week, I got a voicemail. It was Lena again. "You're really doing this, huh? Charging your own family market rent? You know we're struggling. This is heartless, Avery, cold." I listened once, then deleted it. I wasn't being cold. I was being fair. For the first time in my life, I had the power to set boundaries. And I was using it. 2 weeks later, I showed up for the scheduled inspection. Rick opened the door. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Place looks the same," I said, stepping inside. "It's falling apart," he muttered. I nodded. That tends to happen when no one maintains it. He said nothing. Layla was pacing in the hallway, arms crossed. "We raised you, Avery," she snapped. "You lived here. This house is part of you too." I turned to face her. "No, Lena, I survived here." "That's different." She scoffed. "You're acting like a stranger, like we're the enemy." I met her eyes. I begged for years to be part of this family. I bent myself into shapes trying to fit. You slammed doors in my face. Now that I have the keys, suddenly I'm the villain? She didn't reply, just stared at me like she didn't recognize me anymore. Rick finally spoke. "What do you want, Avery?" I looked around the house. The scuffed floorboards, the cracks in the wall, the outdated wallpaper. I saw the past in every corner. But I also saw something else. Possibility. I want closure, I said. I want to take this place and make something new out of it, something that doesn't carry the weight of rejection. Rick sighed. You planning to kick us out? I'm planning to renovate, I replied. You have 2 months left on the lease. After that, we'll reassess. And I meant it. I wasn't doing this out of spite. I was simply reclaiming my space. As I left, I heard Lena say under her breath, "She thinks she's better than us now." I paused at the door and turned back one last time. "No, Lena," I said. "I just finally realized I never needed to be like you." I didn't go back to the house again for several weeks. Instead, I focused on the future. I met with my architect, a woman I deeply respected, also someone who'd grown up in foster care and understood the weight a house could carry. We walked the property together, took measurements, and sketched out possibilities. "I see a lot of pain in these walls," she said softly, running her fingers along the chipped doorway. "But you could turn it into something healing." That word stuck with me. Healing. I thought about it for days. At first, I'd planned to renovate and sell, get a clean break, profit, move on. But the more time I spent thinking, the more I realized maybe this house could become something bigger than profit. Well, I called a friend who worked with a local nonprofit. I asked about programs that support young women aging out of foster care or escaping abusive homes. Turns out, housing was the hardest thing to find. "What if I donated the space?" I asked. My friend paused. "You'd give up a whole property?" "I'd reclaim it," I said, "just not for me." 2 weeks later, I stood in front of the house again, this time with a new team of designers, social workers, and volunteers. We cleared the debris, stripped the walls, ripped up carpet. Every swing of the hammer felt like letting go. We painted the tiny bedroom a soft, hopeful yellow. We installed new flooring in the living room where I'd once sat alone during holidays. We turned the basement into a study lounge. By the time we finished, it didn't feel like that house anymore. It was something else. Something better. I didn't tell Rick or Lena what I was doing. It wasn't about them anymore. 3 months passed. Their lease ended. They left quietly, no drama, no thank you. Just gone. And honestly, that was fine. I didn't need closure from them. I'd already found my own. The day we opened the doors to our first resident, I stood by the front porch. This time, not as a girl desperate to belong, but as a woman who had built belonging for others. The young woman who walked through the door had one suitcase and tired eyes. I saw a piece of myself in her. "Welcome home," I said. And I meant it. The funny thing about healing is that it doesn't happen all at once. It shows up slowly, in quiet mornings, in the way you breathe a little easier, in the peace that creeps in when you're not even looking for it. After the house opened, I started spending time there again. Not as a tenant, not as a child trying to be seen, but as a woman who had rewritten the meaning of that space. I'd bring coffee to the residents, sit on the porch with them, listen to their stories. Some had scars deeper than mine. Others were still learning how to speak without apology. And somehow, being with them helped me forgive parts of myself I hadn't realized still hurt. One afternoon, I found myself sitting in what used to be my tiny bedroom. It was now a reading nook, filled with sunlight, pillows, and a little bookshelf someone donated. A girl, maybe 16, was curled up in the corner, reading. She looked up at me, half smiling, and said, "This room feels safe." I nodded. It didn't used to, but I'm glad it does now. That night, driving home, I thought about how far I'd come. I didn't have a big family. I didn't have parents waiting with open arms. But I had something else, a life I built with my own hands and a community I chose with my own heart. Rick passed away 6 months later. I found out through a mutual contact. I didn't attend the funeral. I didn't need to. Lena sent a short email afterward. Just one sentence. "I hope you're doing well." I never replied, because I was doing well, not because of them, but in spite of them. I wasn't the girl standing at the edge of the dining table anymore. I was the one building tables, pulling out chairs, and saying, "You belong here," to girls who needed to hear it. People always say family is about blood, but I learned something else. Family is where you feel seen, where you feel safe, where you are loved, not out of obligation, but by choice. And after years of trying to fit into a family that never wanted me, I finally stopped trying. I chose to belong to myself, and I've never felt more at home.